August 1938. SS planners stand before a granite quarry in the Austrian Alps and see not stone, but a weapon. Within months, this picturesque hillside becomes something historians will call one of the most brutal concentration camps in the Nazi system. Here, prisoners don't just die. They're crushed, worked into dust, forced to carry stones weighing 30 to 45 pounds, sometimes more, up 186 steps until their hearts explode. At the top, guards shove them backward into the abyss. The SS calls it the stairs of death. Survivors call it exactly what it was designed to be, an apparatus of killing disguised as labor. You know Auschwitz. You've heard the statistics, the gas chambers, the industrial scale of murder. But Mauthausen operated on a different principle entirely. This wasn't a factory of immediate death. It was a granite quarry turned into a slow-motion execution site where the work itself was the weapon, where every shift, every step, every swing of a pickaxe was calculated to destroy the human body. The camp produced stone for Hitler's grand architectural fantasies, but its real output was suffering, methodical, engineered, relentless. Today, we're walking through the gates. We're descending those 186 steps. We're meeting the men who designed this horror and the prisoners who somehow survived it. Because Mauthausen wasn't just worse than you think. The logic behind it was more calculated, more deliberate than the headlines suggest. And understanding how it worked, how human beings built an architecture of harm to break other human beings, is the only way to ensure it never happens again. This is the story of Mauthausen. The town of Mauthausen sits about 20 kilometers, roughly 12 miles east of Linz, Austria, along the Danube River. Beautiful countryside, rolling hills, and beneath those hills, some of the hardest granite in Europe. That's what caught the SS eye in early 1938, just weeks after Hitler's annexation of Austria. Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, didn't just want concentration camps to imprison enemies. He wanted them to be profitable, self-sustaining operations that could fund the SS empire while eliminating those deemed unworthy of life. Enter the Deutsche Erd- und Steinwerke GmbH, German Earth and Stone Works, an SS-owned company tasked with extracting granite to build Hitler's dream cities. Berlin, Nuremberg, Linz. Every monument, every boulevard, every columned palace in the Führer's vision required stone. Millions of tons of it. And Himmler realized he had an unlimited workforce. Prisoners. People the regime had declared subhuman, expendable. So they built Mauthausen. Construction began in August 1938. The first inmates arrived from Dachau. About 300 prisoners, Austrian political enemies of the Reich. They didn't build barracks first. They built the quarry infrastructure, rail lines, crane systems, the famous staircase carved directly into the cliff face, 186 steps, uneven, steep, designed without regard for human anatomy. Because this wasn't about efficiency. If it were, they would have used trucks or conveyor systems like any normal industrial operation. The steps were the point. The suffering was the product. By late 1938, the camp housed around 1,000 prisoners. That number exploded rapidly through 1939 and continued to grow. By January 1st, 1945, the main camp held 73,351 prisoners, with tens of thousands more scattered across dozens of subcamps. Over the camp's entire operation, approximately 200,000 people were imprisoned here. But Mauthausen wasn't like other concentration camps. It carried a special designation, Category 3. Grade 3 camps were reserved for incorrigible political enemies of the Reich, people the Nazis believed could never be reformed, only destroyed. This was the harshest classification in the camp system, a death sentence before you even arrived. On February 9th, 1939, Franz Sierreis became the camp's commandant, a position he would hold until the end. He understood his mandate perfectly. He wasn't running a prison. He was running an extermination facility disguised as a work camp. And the horrifying genius was that the work itself did the killing. No need for mass shootings that traumatized guards. No need for gas chambers, at least not at first. Just brutal labor, starvation rations, and stone. 30 to 45-pound granite blocks, sometimes heavier, carried up 186 steps, 12 hours a day, every day, until your body gave out. The SS calculated the mathematics of death. They knew exactly how many calories a human being needed to survive heavy labor. Then they provided deliberately insufficient rations. They knew how much weight a malnourished man could carry before his spine compressed. They made him carry more. They knew the human heart couldn't sustain that workload on starvation. Rations. And they watched it fail, documented it, adjusted the quotas to maximize death while maintaining just enough survivors to keep the operation running. But the cruelty wasn't random. It was bureaucratic, budgeted. By 1940, Mauthausen had become a profit center for the SS. The granite flowed to Berlin. The bodies piled up in crude morgues, and the paperwork, meticulous Nazi paperwork, tracked it all. A single invoice for stone shipments, a death certificate stamped heart failure when everyone knew it was murder by design. Receipts for Zyklon B, personnel files for guards, the entire apparatus of genocide filed and cross-referenced. What happened next would prove that Mauthausen wasn't just a place of labor and death. It was a laboratory for cruelty. Imagine you're on a train, cattle car, packed so tight you can't sit, can't breathe. The journey from wherever they arrested you, across Austria and occupied Europe, including many Spanish Republicans deported via France, takes days. No food, no water, no toilet. People collapse, die standing up, held upright by the crowd. Then the train stops. The doors slide open, dogs shouting, whips cracking. You're in Mauthausen. The arrival process was designed to disorient and break you immediately. Guards screamed contradictory orders. Move faster, stand still, eyes down, look at me. If you hesitated, dogs tore into you. If you moved too slowly, rifle butts cracked ribs. This wasn't chaos. It was orchestrated psychological demolition. Within 10 minutes of arrival, you understood. You had no rights. Your name meant nothing. Your previous life was erased. Then came registration. You stood naked while SS clerks recorded your details. Name, birth date, crime, usually political enemy, or racial undesirable. They issued you a number. That number replaced your identity. A triangle sewn onto your striped uniform indicated your category. Red for political prisoners, green for criminals, pink for homosexuals, black for asocials, the homeless, the mentally ill. Yellow Star of David for Jews. These triangles determined everything. Your barracks assignment, your work detail, your chances of survival. Jews and Soviet POWs received the worst treatment. The SS made no secret of it. After registration, they shaved your head, took your clothes, gave you a uniform if you were lucky. Many prisoners wore only thin striped pajamas, even in Austrian winters when temperatures dropped below freezing. Wooden clogs instead of shoes. No underwear, no socks. You were marched to your barracks, long, wooden buildings designed for 300 but packed with 800. Bunk beds stacked 3 high, barely 2 feet apart. You shared a wooden plank with 5 other men. No mattress, 1 thin blanket for 3 people. The food came next, or what they called food. Breakfast, watery coffee, sometimes with a piece of bread. Lunch in the quarry, thin soup, maybe with a potato peel floating in it. Dinner, the same, starvation-level rations. Meanwhile, you were burning thousands of calories hauling granite. The math was simple. Your body consumed itself. Fat disappeared first, then muscle, Within weeks, prisoners became what the Germans called Muselmänner, walking corpses, so emaciated they shuffled rather than walked, eyes vacant, minds retreating from reality. But the real destruction happened in the quarry. Every morning at 4 a.m., sirens blasted you awake. Roll call at 4:30, standing in formation regardless of weather, rain, snow, freezing fog rolling off the Danube. You stood for hours while SS officers counted and recounted, searching for discrepancies. If someone had died overnight, and someone always had, the body was dragged out and propped up to maintain the count. You stood beside corpses. It was normal. Then the march to the quarry. A 15-minute walk down a steep path to the stone pits below the camp. You could see the stairs from above, 186 steps carved into the cliff. Irregular heights, some 8 inches, some 12. Wide enough for one person. In the pit, work began immediately. Drilling, hammering, prying loose massive granite blocks. The noise was deafening. Dust filled your lungs. And then, the worst part, loading the stone. The SS forced prisoners to carry blocks typically weighing 30 to 45 pounds, though some were forced to carry stones far heavier. You hoisted it onto your shoulders and began climbing. 1 step, 2 steps, your legs burned, 10 steps, 20, your vision blurred, 50 steps, your heart hammered against your ribs like it would explode. 100 steps, your knees buckled, guards shouted, dogs snapped. If you stumbled, the prisoner behind you might trip, causing a chain reaction, men tumbling backward, granite crushing skulls and spines. The SS called these accidents. But sometimes it wasn't an accident at all. Memorial documentation and survivor testimony describe how guards selected prisoners at random, usually Jews, and ordered them to carry stones too heavy to manage. Then they watched. Waited. When the prisoner's legs finally gave out, guards kicked them backward, or simply pushed. The prisoner tumbled down the stairs, smashing into others, bones shattering on granite. When they hit the bottom, guards ordered other prisoners to carry the body back up, then throw it off again. The SS called this parachute jumping, Fallschirmspringer in German. Witnesses later testified that the stairs were slick with blood and human tissue. You couldn't avoid stepping in it. This happened daily, multiple times. And if you survived the quarry, you returned to camp for evening roll call. Again, another hour standing in formation, then your ration of soup, then barracks, then sleep, if you could call it that. Lying on wooden planks, surrounded by groaning, dying men. The smell of dysentery and death overwhelming. Lice crawling everywhere, spreading typhus. Every morning, the barracks supervisor removed the dead. Sometimes 10 bodies, sometimes 30. This was the pipeline. You arrived. You were stripped of identity. Fed just enough to work, but not enough to live. Worked until your body failed. Then disposed of, and the entire process was documented, filed, reported to Berlin with bureaucratic precision. But the quarry wasn't the only way Mauthausen killed. If the stairs were Mauthausen's most infamous feature, the camp's other methods of murder were equally calculated, and even more sadistic. The SS didn't just want death. They wanted spectacle, terror, a performance of total domination that would crush any thought of resistance. Start with the execution sites in the camp. The SS conducted formal shootings against walls in the courtyard, organized deliberate killings. Prisoners selected for execution were marched out, lined up, and shot in the back of the head by designated SS executioners, sometimes individually, sometimes in groups. Between 1941 and 1945, thousands died this way. Guards joked about it, kept tallies. Some prisoners were executed for crimes as minor as possessing an extra piece of bread. Others simply because their barracks needed to free up space. Then there was the bunker, a prison within the prison. Stone cells beneath the main camp where the SS held prisoners awaiting execution or undergoing enhanced interrogation. Torture in plain language. Men were hung by their wrists with arms twisted behind their backs, dislocating shoulders. Others were beaten with iron rods, whipped, starved in darkness for weeks. But the most methodical killing happened in the crematorium basement. There, the SS built what they called a measurement station, a Genickschussanlage, a neck-shooting facility. Prisoners were brought in one by one, told to stand against a measuring stick, supposedly for height documentation. Behind the stick was a slot in the wall. On the other side, an SS man with a pistol. The prisoner never saw it coming. A bullet through the base of the skull, body dragged out, next prisoner brought in. Efficient, brutal. Mauthausen's cruelty extended to medical experiments. SS physicians conducted surgeries without anesthesia, amputations. They infected prisoners with diseases to study progression, injected them with experimental drugs. Prisoners weren't patients. They were test subjects, disposable. If you ended up in the infirmary, you weren't getting treatment. You were waiting to die or be killed. The SS regularly conducted selections in the infirmary, removing prisoners deemed too sick to work. These prisoners were taken to the gas chamber. Yes, Mauthausen had a gas chamber. Construction began in autumn 1941. The first killings occurred in March 1942. It was built in the basement of the infirmary, disguised as a shower room. Tiled walls, shower heads attached to the ceiling, non-functional, purely decorative. Prisoners were told they were being disinfected, stripped, herded inside. The door sealed. Then SS guards dropped Zyklon B pellets through a vent. The same poison used at Auschwitz. Death took 10 to 15 minutes. Agonizing. Bodies clawed at the walls, fingernails left scratches in the tile. Afterward, prisoners from the Sonderkommando, the special work detail, dragged the bodies to the crematorium next door, burned them, disposed of the ashes in the Danube River or spread them on camp roads, erasing evidence, erasing people. Between 1942 and 1945, at least 3,500 prisoners were murdered in the gas chamber. But that number is conservative. Records were destroyed, witnesses killed. The true total may never be known. And then there was winter. Austrian winters were brutal. Temperatures plunged below zero. Snow piled several feet deep. But the work didn't stop. Prisoners still marched to the quarry in their thin uniforms and wooden clogs. Still hauled stone up ice-covered stairs. If you slipped, and everyone slipped, you tumbled backward into the mass of prisoners below. Frostbite was universal. Fingers turned black. Toes fell off. The SS weaponized the cold. Guards forced prisoners to stand outside during roll call for hours, sometimes 5, 6 hours, in freezing rain or snow. Hypothermia set in. Men collapsed, died standing. And if you tried to warm yourself, if you huddled with others for heat, guards turned fire hoses on you. Icy water in sub-zero temperatures. Your clothes froze solid, your skin froze to the fabric. Pulling the uniform off later tore away flesh. This wasn't neglect, this was deliberate. By 1943, Mauthausen had perfected an architecture of murder that required no single killing blow. The quarry destroyed bodies, starvation starved minds. Disease spread unchecked, executions eliminated the defiant. Gas chambers handled the overflow. Winter finished whoever remained. And through it all, the paperwork never stopped. The SS documented everything. Intake forms, death certificates, shipments of Zyklon B, invoices for crematorium fuel. But even machines break down, especially when the people inside them decide to fight back. Resistance at Mauthausen was nearly impossible. The camp's Category 3 designation meant maximum surveillance, maximum brutality, maximum punishment for even the smallest infraction. But impossibility has never stopped desperate people. And beneath the surface, prisoners organized. It started small, networks of communication between barracks. Political prisoners, especially Spanish Republicans and Austrian communists, formed the core. These men had already fought fascism in the Spanish Civil War. They understood clandestine organization. They created an underground committee operating in absolute secrecy. Their goals weren't grandiose. Survival first, mutual aid, sharing extra food rations when possible, warning each other about SS selections, documenting atrocities for future justice. And they sabotaged. Prisoners working in the quarry deliberately damaged equipment. Granite drills accidentally broke. Crane cables frayed at suspicious moments. Stone shipments to Berlin arrived cracked and unusable. The SS suspected sabotage but couldn't prove it without extensive investigations that would slow production. So the quiet rebellion continued. Small acts, tiny defiances, but they mattered. They reminded prisoners that they were still human, still capable of choice. By 1944, the resistance network had expanded. They smuggled information out of the camp through civilian workers at the quarry, Austrians who, while not active resistors, were willing to carry messages. These messages reached Allied intelligence, detailed descriptions of the camp layout, guard positions, execution schedules. The resistance hoped this information would lead to liberation, or at least to the camp being bombed, ending the suffering even if it meant their own deaths. But the most dramatic act of resistance came in February 1945, the Mühlviertler Hasenjagd, the Mühlviertel Hare Hunt. Nearly 500 Soviet officers imprisoned at Mauthausen made a desperate escape attempt. They had been held in Block 20, isolated from other prisoners, subjected to particularly brutal treatment. They knew liberation was coming. Soviet forces were advancing from the east, Americans from the west. But they also knew the SS planned to execute them before the Allies arrived. So they decided to run. On the night of February 2nd, during an Allied bombing raid that cut the camp's power, the prisoners broke out. They overwhelmed guards, smashed through barbed wire, scattered into the Austrian countryside in sub-zero temperatures, wearing only their striped uniforms. The SS mobilized immediately. They called in Wehrmacht units, local police, and, most shamefully, they armed Austrian civilians, offered rewards for dead prisoners. What followed was a massacre. Farmers, villagers, ordinary Austrians hunted down freezing unarmed men and murdered them, shot them, beat them to death with farming tools, turned them over to the SS for execution. Of the nearly 500 who escaped, only 11 survived. 11. The rest were slaughtered within days, their bodies left in ditches, in barns, in the snow. The SS documented the hunt with pride. After the war, several Austrian civilians were prosecuted for their role in the murders. Most received light sentences. Some were never charged at all. Back inside Mauthausen, the resistance prepared for liberation. They knew the SS would try to destroy evidence, burn documents, dismantle the gas chamber, execute remaining witnesses. So they hid records, buried testimony, memorized guard names and faces, prepared to testify. And when the SS began making plans to liquidate the camp in late April 1945, the resistance did something extraordinary. They stalled. Camp electricians sabotaged equipment. Camp clerks lost execution lists. Prisoners in work details deliberately slowed down. And crucially, they got word to the advancing American forces. Mauthausen exists. Thousands still alive. Hurry. The Americans were coming, but the question was whether they'd arrive in time. As April 1945 turned to May, Mauthausen descended into chaos. The SS evacuated other camps ahead of Allied advances, flooding Mauthausen with prisoners from across the collapsing Reich. The camp designed for a few thousand now held over 70,000. Food ran out, disease exploded. Bodies piled faster than they could be burned. The crematorium ovens ran day and night, unable to keep pace. Death surrounded everything. Then, on May 5, 1945, liberation came. The war in Europe was hours from ending. Adolf Hitler was dead. Berlin had fallen. Most SS guards had fled days earlier. Commandant Reich disappeared into the Austrian mountains. But 20,000 prisoners remained, too weak to move, terrified the SS would return to finish what they started. American forces from the 11th Armored Division approached the camp. What the soldiers saw defied comprehension. Emaciated figures in striped uniforms stared back through the wire. Living skeletons, men weighing 70 pounds. Some couldn't stand. Others crawled toward the fence, reaching through with skeletal hands. Within hours, more American units arrived. Soldiers, medics, chaplains. They cut the power to the fence and opened the gates. And what they found inside went beyond any briefing, any intelligence report, any preparation. The smell hit them first. Decay, human waste, disease, then the bodies. Piles of corpses stacked like cordwood outside the barracks. Dead in the infirmary, dead on the parade ground. Dead still lying in bunks, indistinguishable from the living except they weren't breathing. One American soldier later wrote, "I've seen death. I fought across Europe, but nothing prepared me for Mauthausen. These weren't soldiers killed in battle. These were people systematically destroyed, on purpose, with planning. I couldn't understand how human beings could do this to other human beings." The Americans immediately began administering aid, but it was complicated. Prisoners who'd been starved for years couldn't simply be given food. Their bodies would go into shock. Refeeding syndrome could kill them, so medics provided small amounts of broth. Vitamins. Slowly reintroduced calories. Even so, hundreds died in the first week after liberation. Their bodies too damaged, too far gone. American commanders ordered local Austrian civilians to tour the camp, forced them to see what had been done in their backyard. "We didn't know," they claimed, but the Americans didn't believe them. Mauthausen sat 20 kilometers from Linz. The quarry operated for 7 years. Stone flowed through the town. Prisoners marched through the streets to subcamps. Smoke from the crematorium was visible for miles. They knew. They chose to ignore it. And then the hunt for the perpetrators began. Franz Reich was captured on May 23rd, hiding in a hunting lodge in the Austrian mountains. American soldiers shot him during the arrest, whether intentionally or not remains debated. Mortally wounded, Reich gave a confession before he died. He described the camp's operations in detail, admitted to ordering executions, blamed Himmler for the policies but accepted responsibility for implementation. His confession became critical evidence at war crimes trials. Other SS personnel were arrested quickly. Camp physicians responsible for medical experiments and gas chamber selections were captured and tried by US military tribunals, found guilty of war crimes. Many were executed by hanging. August Eigruber, the Gauleiter of Upper Austria, who oversaw Mauthausen's operations, was tried at the Dachau Mauthausen proceedings and executed at Landsberg in 1947. In total, 61 SS members and kapos were convicted in the Mauthausen-Gusen camp trials. 58 were sentenced to death. 49 were executed in May 1947. The trials established critical legal precedents. They proved that following orders was not a defense for crimes against humanity. That bureaucrats who signed papers were as guilty as guards who pulled triggers. That systematic murder, even when disguised as labor policy, was genocide. But justice was incomplete. Thousands of SS guards disappeared into post-war Europe, changed their names, blended into society. Many were never caught. Some lived comfortably for decades, died of old age, never faced trial. How many died at Mauthausen? The question seems simple. The answer is not. The SS kept records. Meticulous bureaucratic documentation until they didn't. In April 1945, as liberation approached, they destroyed files, burned documents, erased evidence. What remains are fragments, survivor testimony, incomplete registries, Allied forensic investigations, and from those fragments, historians have reconstructed an approximation of the horror. Conservative estimates placed the death toll at Mauthausen and its subcamps at approximately 100,000 people, but that number is almost certainly low. It accounts for registered prisoners, those who were logged into the camp system, given numbers, documented. It doesn't account for prisoners killed immediately upon arrival. Doesn't account for mass executions in the early years when record-keeping was less rigorous. Doesn't account for prisoners transferred to Mauthausen specifically to be executed and never officially registered. Some historians argue the true number approaches 200,000. Who were they? Political prisoners formed the original core: Austrian communists, German socialists, trade unionists, people who opposed the Nazi regime and paid with their lives. Then came Spanish Republicans, over 7,000 men who fought against Franco, fled to France, were captured by the Germans after France fell, and deported to Mauthausen. Most died in the quarry. Soviet POWs arrived en masse in 1941 after Germany invaded the USSR. Thousands were executed immediately. Others worked to death. The SS considered Soviet prisoners subhuman, treated them worse than almost any other group except Jews. By 1942, Jews made up an increasing percentage of Mauthausen's population. Transports from Hungary, Poland, the Netherlands, Greece. As other camps were liquidated, their prisoners were sent to Mauthausen to die. By early 1945, the camp held prisoners from over 30 countries. But numbers obscure individuality. Behind each statistic was a person, a name, a life. There was Simon Wiesenthal, the Austrian Jew who survived Mauthausen's subcamp system and dedicated his post-war life to hunting Nazi war criminals. He brought Adolf Eichmann to justice, located hundreds of perpetrators hiding in plain sight, spent decades insisting the world remember. There was Aldo Carpi, an Italian painter imprisoned for anti-fascist activities. He sketched camp life in secret, haunting images of prisoners, guards, the quarry. His drawings, smuggled out and preserved, became evidence at war crimes trials and now reside in museums. Visual testimony that words alone cannot convey. There was Luigi Ferri, an Italian soldier who survived the stairs of death and later testified at trials. He described watching men pushed off the cliff, described the sound of bodies hitting granite. His testimony helped convict multiple SS officers, and there were thousands whose names we'll never know. Prisoners who arrived were assigned numbers, worked until they died, and were incinerated. No records survived. No one left to remember them. They exist now only as part of the statistical approximation. 100,000, maybe 200,000. Ghosts in the arithmetic of genocide. The subcamps made the numbers worse. Mauthausen operated dozens of subcamps scattered across Austria. Gusen 1, 2, and 3 were the largest. Massive complexes where prisoners dug tunnels into mountains for underground weapons factories. Tens of thousands died there. At Ebensee, prisoners built tunnels for V2 rocket production. 8,000 dead. At Melk, prisoners constructed an underground factory. 5,000 dead. Each subcamp was a satellite of horror, replicating Mauthausen's brutality on a smaller scale. Liberation didn't end the dying. In May and June 1945, after the Americans arrived, many prisoners died from the effects of starvation, disease, and brutality. Their bodies couldn't recover. Too much damage, too much suffering. Medics did everything possible. It wasn't enough. By the time the last survivors left Mauthausen in late 1945, transferred to hospitals, repatriation centers, displaced persons camps, the site was nearly empty. A shell. The barracks still stood. The quarry remained. The stairs still descended into the earth, but the machine had stopped. The question became, what do we do with this place? In 1949, the Republic of Austria designated Mauthausen a national memorial. The site was preserved, not as a museum of curiosity, but as a warning. A physical reminder that civilized nations can descend into barbarism, that bureaucracy can facilitate genocide, that ordinary people can participate in extraordinary evil when they choose indifference over resistance. Today, Mauthausen receives over 200,000 visitors annually. They walk through the gates, see the barracks, stand in the quarry, descend the stairs of death, now fitted with railings and informational plaques. The gas chamber remains, preserved exactly as it was found. The crematorium ovens still stand, and throughout the site, memorials erected by different nations honor their dead. Poland, Hungary, Spain, the Soviet Union, Italy. Each monument a testament to suffering and a plea for remembrance. The International Monument, designed by a team of survivors and artists, anchors the memorial complex. It features figures pushing through barriers, a metaphor for prisoners breaking free from oppression. Inscribed on the base are words in multiple languages. Never again. 2 words. A promise. A warning. An imperative. But memory is fragile. As survivors die, and by now almost all have, the living testimony disappears. We're left with documents, photographs, video interviews recorded decades ago. Physical sites like Mauthausen, these become the guardians of memory, the last witnesses when human witnesses are gone. This is why Holocaust education matters. Why sites like Mauthausen must be preserved. Why we must teach each generation what happened here. Because the conditions that enabled Mauthausen didn't begin with gas chambers and execution walls. They began with words, propaganda, dehumanization, the slow erosion of empathy until certain groups were declared less than human, unworthy of rights, disposable. It began with laws that stripped citizenship from Jews, with speeches that blamed minorities for economic hardship, with crowds that cheered as neighbors were arrested, with ordinary people who saw injustice and chose silence, with bureaucrats who processed paperwork knowing it led to death, but told themselves they were just following orders, with citizens who lived 20 kilometers from a camp and claimed they didn't know, didn't see, didn't hear. Mauthausen teaches us that genocide doesn't erupt overnight. It's built, systematically, with planning and logistics and budgets and meetings. It requires participation at every level. Politicians who write laws, businessmen who profit from slave labor, guards who pull triggers, clerks who file papers, citizens who look away. And it teaches us that resistance matters, that even in the most brutal conditions, people retained their humanity. Prisoners who shared their last piece of bread, who sabotaged equipment, who documented atrocities knowing they might never survive to testify, who chose solidarity over self-preservation. Their resistance didn't stop the machine, but it slowed it, saved lives, preserved evidence, proved that even in hell, people could choose compassion. The stairs of death still exist. You can walk them, each step irregular, uneven, designed without mercy. At the top, you can look down and imagine carrying 40 pounds of granite. Imagine doing it 12 hours a day on starvation rations. Imagine guards behind you, dogs, whips, winter cold. And imagine knowing that if you stumble, they'll push you off. Now imagine you're one of the prisoners who survived, who climbed those stairs thousands of times, who watched friends die, who somehow endured until liberation, and imagine carrying that memory for the rest of your life. The nightmares, the survivor's guilt, the weight of testimony. That's what Mauthausen demands of us. Not just to remember the dead, but to honor the survivors by learning what they taught, to recognize the warning signs, to speak when we see dehumanization, to resist when we see injustice, to never accept the premise that any human being is disposable. August 1938. SS planners looked at a quarry and saw a weapon. By May 5, 1945, that weapon had killed at least 100,000 people, likely far more. The granite flowed to Berlin, the bodies burned in ovens, and the world, for a while, forgot. But Mauthausen refuses to be forgotten. It stands as physical proof. The stairs still descend. The gas chamber still exists. The execution sites still bear the marks of murder. And every year, survivors and their descendants return. They place flowers. They recite names. They weep. And they remind us, this happened here, in the heart of Europe, in the 20th century, done by educated people in a civilized nation. We close with the words of Elie Wiesel, survivor and witness. For the dead and the living, we must bear witness. We've borne witness tonight to the stairs, the quarry, the apparatus of death, the suffering, the resistance, the liberation, the memory. Now the question is yours. What will you do with this knowledge? Will you let it fade into abstraction? Or will you carry it forward, recognizing that the fight against hatred isn't historical? It's eternal. Mauthausen's logic was worse than the headlines suggest. But more importantly, it was real. And remembering that reality is how we prevent its return. If this story moved you, challenged you, or helped you see the Second World War differently, it would be an honor to have you join our growing community. Subscribing isn't just a click. It's a way to support more powerful stories, more forgotten voices, and more truth from the past. So if you believe these stories matter, hit that subscribe button and let's keep building this journey together. And don't forget to leave a comment. We read every one and love hearing your thoughts. Until next time, keep exploring history with Epic War. Keep asking questions. Keep seeking the truth.